Wonderful to have you here. My name is Stephen Fetter. I manage the United and Learning program for the General Council office. I'm also the minister at Forest Hill United Church. And it is a pleasure and a delight, and I thought I had turned that timer off. A pleasure and a delight to be able to connect with colleagues across the country and talk about ways that we can respond to this pandemic that we're in and be the church. I just have this strong sense that we are doing the most important ministry of our lives right now. And that we need to be the church in the midst of the hardest crisis that our nation has faced since the Second World War. We're in this together. And it's great to be able to share tips and tricks and learn from each other as we do that. I've got 4 different people with me today, and I'm going to just cancel the spotlight here and invite them each to introduce themselves. So, Alan, you turned up on my screen first. Why don't you tell us who you are?
I didn't know I'd have to introduce, but no. I'm Alan Buckingham. I'm a media technology consultant based in Banff, Alberta. I work primarily with churches and church organizations. I'm also the creator of a worship resource called Together We Worship. It's been around for 5 years, and it basically is a worship package that includes a video sermon and other stuff. Primarily was designed for people to lead in their local congregations if they needed a little help and support with worship, but it turns out that this can be translated into send around, and everybody can lead their own little worship in their own little safe, physically distanced group in their house too. So thanks
Great.
for having me, and looking forward to sharing some insights I've gained over the years with y'all.
And George, let me spotlight your video here. For those of you who've got a video on, could you please turn it off? We're going to ask those who are not being presenters to have the videos off because it's just distracting for those of us who are watching. So George, who are you and what brings you into this call?
Well, my name is George Bott. I live in Marathon, Ontario, topmost point on Lake Superior, about halfway between Thunder Bay and Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario. I'm a member of St. John's United Church. I'm one of 4 licensed lay worship leaders there. And I'm actually going into a kind of a period of retirement right now because we have finally hired a minister for the next while. And so my life is changing in somewhat. But I'm part of the original team that developed the online licensed lay worship leader training program that is being delivered through United in Learning and hosted by Canadian Shield Regional Council and St. John's United Church. And my wife and I are also the instigators behind, on behalf of St. John's United Church, a project called United in Worship. And each week we offer a complete worship service that is available online for churches that are interested and don't have, our target is actually churches without clergy. And we're also becoming more involved in a multi-site worship experience. And so we've got that technology in our sanctuary, and this is the newest project for us. But we're learning things as we move along, and we're trying to do it under very adverse conditions. Some of our communities don't have much in the way of internet at all.
Yeah, thank you. It's a complicated life that you guys live, and we're appreciative of the experience that you bring to this. Andrea, tell us about you and what brings you into leadership here today.
Yes, hello everyone. It's so great to be here. My name is Andrea Irwin, and I'm currently the online minister at Highlands United Church here in North Vancouver, BC. We have been live streaming our services for the better part of about 8 years now, but really my role over the past 4 years has sort of been in the research and development of how we can really break down the barriers between the us and the them, that idea that the congregants that are in person are somehow different from the congregants that are online. And so how do we build relationships between those 2 places? And also, how do we better minister to those people who are only attending online and who know nothing about our congregation as it exists in person. So that's part A of my work. And then part B, I also work as the minister for United Online, which is a recent church plant experiment of the BC Conference of Pacific Mountain Region. And that role is really to do things exactly like this, to help equip leaders to be more competent and comfortable using technology, to try and convince people that this is not as scary as it might seem and that we should all be doing it. And then to provide some resources that seekers who are looking for the United Church Online can help find. So that's sort of the next phase. I could talk about this stuff for hours, so I'm so pleased to be asked to be here. These gentlemen are laughing because they know.
I have a sense that we could all talk about it for hours, that this is a passion for all four of us. And that's, we're just so delighted to have you with us, Andrea. And part of what I'm loving about this team is how we're spread out across the whole country. I have actually met two of the three of you face to face, but not more than once or twice. And we've done most of the work we've ever done together just exactly this way, and that's kind of cool. Couple of technical thoughts, and then I'd like to open us with prayer. We are, as we've mentioned, streaming in two different platforms, so the directions are a little different for each one. Let me talk first of all to the people who are on Zoom. To those of you on Zoom, welcome. We're glad you're here. We have muted your mics and disabled them so that the dogs barking and the sirens that go by your house don't disrupt our conversation. And we're asking you please also not to turn your camera on. If you do by mistake, I'll turn it off, because we just want to keep the video focused on the people who are presenting it. It will help all of us to stay focused on the stuff we're doing together. The way for you to interact with us is through the written chat. So move your mouse over top of where my picture is, and you'll see all of the Zoom icons come up on the bottom of the screen. Click the one that says chat, and you'll see an extra box opens up beside the Zoom window. Down at the bottom, there's a little spot that says type message here. Please do that. And go ahead and add your comments and questions and thoughts and ideas and stories and all of the rest of that there, and we'll do our best, our very best, to incorporate as many of those as we see as we go along. We want this to be as interactive as possible. For those of you who are watching on YouTube, you don't even have the option of a camera and a mic. That's just the way YouTube works. But we had so many people last week that we had to work in two different platforms. But you still have the option of the chat. Now, you need to be logged in with a free Google account, but almost everybody has one of those these days. I hope you do. Please log in if you haven't already, and add your own comments to the chat. Our colleague Erin and our colleague Kate are both watching the chat over there, and they're going to summarize what they see and bring it up in the Zoom chat for us, so that the four of us here in Zoom don't have to be watching both platforms at the same time. Last night for the big webinar with 1,000 people, that process worked really well. You'll find that the YouTube stream is about 30 seconds behind what's happening in Zoom. So we may find that by the time your question gets cut and pasted back into Zoom, that we've gone on to something else. We'll do our best to circle back. Again, we want this to be interactive. Your thoughts and questions are important. And we're aware that we can only just barely scratch the surface today as we start to explore some of these topics. So add your thoughts, add your comments. They may well be fodder for another gathering together later on in the season. Having said that, we are not just gathering on a meeting. We're not just gathering to watch the computer. We are people of God. And we invite God into our presence. And so I'd invite you, in the middle of the frenzy, in the middle of the anxiety, in the middle of the discomfort and unusualness of this time we're living in and this medium we're meeting in, to pause for a moment and to remember that we are surrounded and held in the light of Christ. I have a candle in front of me that I light at the beginning of every worship time with my congregation. And maybe if you have a candle in your office, you would like to light yours at the same time. And as we light this together, I always remind those who have gathered that we are guided by the light of Christ, that God is with us, and we are not alone. Thanks be to God. Then I take the candle and I put it on a stack of books beside me so that I don't knock it with my hands when I get excited. Because I almost did once, and that was not a good thing. We absolutely are, and we are recording this. It's recorded at YouTube. Let me just record it in Zoom as well, so that in case the YouTube stream goes down, we still have it. Thank you for the reminder. We are gathered as colleagues together, as those who care deeply about the leadership of the church and the worship in the church. And I wanted to kick this off with some greetings to the moderator, who has been doing his own experimenting with how to do worship online, and who is very much with us in spirit. Let's hear what he had to say to us. Whoops. There it is.
Grace and peace to you in Jesus' name. It is good to have you together today. I'm really glad you're able to join for this time on Zoom to have a conversation about online worship. You may have caught some of the online worship that I've been taking part in over the last few weeks, and you may have noticed that things don't always run as smoothly as we would like. That's okay. The reality of faith simply need ways of worshiping God together in this time where we can't be in the same place. I know that you've got a number of people who are going to help you think through some of the things that will be helpful in that process. But thank you so much for trying to find ways of bringing your community of faith, the people that you've been called to serve, together. Whether it's using online tools or it's using some of our older tech like the telephone. I really appreciate the ministry that you are doing. God bless.
So thank you to Richard for taking time out of his crazy busy schedule to share that with us. Let me tell you briefly what we hope to do together in the next hour, and I'm going to move this over to my main screen so that I can see it and not look away from the camera. We want to spend some time together talking about what are we doing when we're doing online worship? How does this work? Why are we doing it? What are the spiritual needs of the people who are gathering? And a variety of different tools and methods that we can use. Everybody jumps immediately to live stream, and sometimes that's the right tool, and sometimes it's not. Sometimes that's just too complicated and more complicated than we need it to be. So that'll be the first part of our conversation. And then we want to move into the nuts and bolts of preparing worship and look at some ways that each of the four of us have been experimenting with different pieces of the worship service: the welcome, the music, the sermon, the prayers, the offering. We've got a statement from our theology folks at the General Council on communion, and I know some of you have been asking about that because you want to do communion at Easter. And then, gosh, would it be United Church worship if we didn't have coffee hour? So those are our hopes, and that's our agenda. That's the direction we're going. My lucky job is to play timekeeper, and hope I can do that. And we intend to kind of skate through this. It's going to be a high level discussion of what's possible. This is not a nuts and bolts thing. This is not about how to use any particular tools in any particular platforms. There are loads of programs out there. Lots of regions are doing a sort of Zoom 101, how to use this for that and the other thing. The help menus on all of these different platforms, the support videos, all of that are really helpful. We didn't want to duplicate any of those. Alan and Andrea in particular teach some wonderful stuff. And if you get excited by what they're saying and want to learn more about the nuts and bolts, go take one of their courses. And just hope that the power doesn't go out on Alan when he's about to start teaching. But for today, we want to do a little more high level, what's possible and why are we doing this, and what does it mean to worship when we can't actually be side by side in the sanctuary. So that's our goal. And let me begin just by throwing it out to those of you who are gathered online for a minute. What are you noticing about the spiritual needs of your congregation right now? I think the ground has shifted under us drastically in the last 3 weeks. I had a conversation with a retired minister in my congregation. We were talking about the struggle of trying to find hymns for this time period and how that's not as easy, because there's not a lot of hymns in our hymn book that seem to address the kinds of concerns we're wanting right now. So yeah, add to the chat, and those of you who are facilitating with me, hold up some of the ones you're seeing, and I know I'll be watching the YouTube one too. So just name them quickly. We're just sort of popcorn style here.
Yeah, so we have some comments about the physical touch. So how important that is in our communities to actually be able to physically connect with people, and that's one that we can't do anything about, but that we're seeing pop up a lot. So what does that look like in an online space for sure?
Yeah, and music and hugs and loneliness.
Yeah,
fear and loneliness.
Being boredom. Yeah. Singing together. I don't know if any of you have experimented with virtual choirs that are existing right now. We probably have all figured out by now that Zoom is not the greatest when you all want to sing at the same time, but there certainly are some things available out there for that. But that's a big piece that's missing for a lot of people.
The community choir that I sing is doing a virtual performance this weekend, and I don't have time to participate. I'm so disappointed.
Trinity United in North Bay is experimenting with virtual choir.
Paula on YouTube is saying not being able to gather for funerals and concern about palliative care. Absolutely.
Especially in places like Quebec and Ontario that are harder hit in our country for sure by COVID as well. That's a really challenging piece.
One of the congregations that I work with is really quite elderly. The average age is 87 right now. And so it's important that we be in contact with one another on a regular basis. And they've learned the gift of looking after one another. They're the best pastoral caregivers I think I've ever met in my life. And they do look after one another each day.
Wonderful. There was a
Westminster United Church on YouTube is saying just seeing each other, providing in-person support when others are going through difficulty. Absolutely.
Yeah.
There's a question about whether or not we'll discuss some copyright concerns, and we'll probably get into that a little bit in the second part.
Yeah, I think so, particularly when we talk about music. I think that'll be important. Thank you. Bring us back to that if we forget.
Your
And I
concern
saw a couple questions about people who don't have internet, older folks, particularly, that kind of things. And one of the things I'm a technology consultant, but I feel like in a lot of my webinars and conversations, I've been pushing low tech options. So we will get into some of that too.
What a great segue, Ellen, because that was the first thing we were going to do on the agenda, was ask you to talk exactly about that. You knew that was coming, right?
Yeah. So live stream is where a lot of people jump to first. But that's not by far the only option. You can pre-record video, you can pre-record audio, you can write stuff. One of my favorite low-tech options I've heard of is minister did up a little prayer, a short order of service and a reflection, and hand-delivered to the congregants in their community of faith. Like, that is low-tech. I also heard about somebody put an envelope on the front of the church where you could stop by and pick up a sheet. Super cool. These are all viable ways to help your community do worship right now. All totally legit. I want to give the example of what we're doing at my community of faith. I'm not ministry personnel. I'm just a big church geek. So I just want to share the screen. And so you get an example of what we're doing. So I get an email from my ministry personnel that has a PDF from our musician, and we're blessed to have a lovely musician in our small congregation. When we have 10 on Sunday, it's a big week. And so Murray and Aurora have talked a little bit. Aurora's read the passages, finds a piece of music, plays it, records it, writes a little blurb. I get a link here. I click it. Aurora can record on SoundCloud. That's great. I can play the piece of music. It's lovely, whatever. And then the purpose is I play the music, and then I click on this other document, which is the message from reflection, little notes from my minister. and I read that while I'm listening to the music. This is what's being provided in my congregation, and I could help them with all kinds of tech, but this is what they can do easy, what the people want and suits their needs, and then we go through and we do it. You could do, rather than in here, you could have these links go to little video clips that you've recorded or other members of your congregation have recorded. Could be just audio. It's just an easy, simple way to throw stuff together and give people a different worship opportunity.
I think that's really helpful. Are there others of you who are doing things that are lower tech than live stream that you want to share and name here, please?
I would,
Well,
sorry.
Okay,
No, go
Andrea
ahead.
first and then George.
Yep.
So I just would love to offer a little anecdote. So one of the things that I think is really important to remember is that the key reason we're offering this is to serve our people, and knowing our people is so important in this time. I just had a phone conversation with a pastor in Tacoma, Washington a couple of days ago, and on his live stream box, he noticed in the chat box that one of the things that was popping up over and over again were requests for distilled water. And he was really concerned about this because, of course, we have clean drinking water here in the West Coast. And he realized that these were requests for people who had CPAP machines at home, and you can't put tap water in a CPAP machine to have them function properly. And so he created a system in order to take those orders and hand deliver them to people. And in my mind, that was such a beautiful idea of getting to know what the needs of your people are in this time. They didn't want a Bible study, they needed water. And he responded to that in a way that I actually think is online ministry, right? It's not just the big worship piece, it's what are your people actually in need of right now. So just as maybe a consolation for some people who are feeling really overwhelmed by all of the options out there, really use this time to just listen for what it is your people want.
George.
Well, one of the problems we have in Northwestern Ontario in many of our communities is that we don't have high-speed internet. Not everybody does. And one of the churches that I work with, in fact, one person in the congregation has a cell phone. The others still all have landlines. 2 people in the congregation have computers or tablets. But that creates an issue, because I decided that this week I was going to try and do some kind of a service around Palm Sunday with that group of folk, only to discover that with all of the technology I have around me, none of it would work, allowing me to gather them together in a phone conversation. I called T-Baytel. They said, no, sorry, you can't do that with a cell phone. And I don't have anything more than a cell phone now. But I did think to call our regional office and say, do you still have that conferencing system that you used with the phones a couple of years back? And it turns out that they did. And so through the regional office's phone conferencing system, I'm going to be able to worship with the folks at St. Andrews and Scriber on Sunday. And while it will be a truncated service, we're not going to go for a full hour, but we will have a chance to worship on Palm Sunday. And it's worshiping together is the one thing this community can still do. And most of the things they're limited by are because of their age. They physically can no longer do the things they did when they were young men and women in the church, but they can still worship together. So it's finding the way that will do that, and telephone technology is still there for us to do that.
Sure. George, your mic is not great today. You might switch it out for something else where you're kind of cutting in and out a little bit, if you please.
Yep.
In the congregation I lead, we're doing a daily prayer service every night at 6 o'clock. And I would say about a third of our members we're using Zoom, but a third of our members are joining by telephone only. And so we have taken hymn books out of our sanctuary and taken them over to people and say, dial in on the phone and sing along with us. And here's the hymn book so that you have the words. And that means that we don't have to be deciding a week ahead which hymns we're going to sing on the Wednesday night prayer service. I love the idea of mailing out the order of service to people ahead of time. And gosh, I wish I were that well organized. I am still working on Sunday's bulletin. A little later than usual this week, but I've had a few other things on the go.
I would like to throw out as well to not be afraid to ask some of the younger people in your congregation that might be a little more tech savvy, if they might have the time these days to walk an older member of the congregation through how to use one of these pieces, this is a time when the church can actually be really instrumental in some of that training that maybe people haven't been able to find or haven't had the patience to give in other ways. So if you had a group of youth or young adults that might be interested in walking someone through how to go to youtube.com, that would be a really wonderful way to get them involved as well.
Yeah, and it goes both ways. I was reading in the chat box, there were folks saying, the 80-year-olds on our congregation are great. My 65-year-old aunt was just telling me about how an 80-year-old friend of hers just taught her how to use Zoom. So, it happens in every direction all the way around.
Awesome.
The folks who have been most helpful in my congregation are the lay people. And we've been saying on our services, who's not here? Look around. Who could you phone? Call your friend, and virtually hold their hand. And it's made a big difference. We are slowly bringing in more and more people. We're doing a stewardship letter going out tomorrow, and we've discovered there's only about a dozen people in the whole congregation for whom we don't have email addresses. That doesn't mean that they're all comfortable with YouTube, because they sure aren't. But at least there's email for most of them, so it reduces the number of mailouts we have to do substantially.
Yep.
No, we don't have to actually physically visit each other, Catherine, but you can drop something off at somebody's door and then walk away and phone them and say it's there waiting for you. We certainly have people in my congregation who are doing that, not only with hymn books, but also with groceries.
That's a great idea, Dan. I think there are so many great ideas coming up in the chat about ways outside of just the worship that we can sort of include under the umbrella of online ministry. What are the other pieces that we can offer? Are they live? Are they pre-recorded? And what do those look like? I'm loving some of the ideas that are coming up in there.
Mm-hmm. So I don't know all of the different online platforms that are possible. One of the reasons that the General Counsel Office chose to go with Zoom is because every paid account for Zoom includes the ability to dial in by telephone. And it was important for us to use a platform that would provide that option for people. So that's one of the things we're appreciating. There are other options, and the free Zoom accounts are supposed to, but I think right now they've blocked that because they're just overwhelmed. The paid accounts for Zoom all provide dial-in access at several different area codes where you can use.
You can still get lucky with the free ones. They just say they're not guaranteeing it. So whether you want to count on that, but the free accounts, in theory, you can still call in, and sometimes you can go over your 40 minutes and they don't care. But if things get busy, you're the first out. So.
Do any of you know whether or not FaceTime allows you to call phones up?
Yes,
from Mac?
An audio call, or do you mean not an iPhone?
No, I mean an audio call. Can we do audio phone calls from FaceTime?
You can, but you would have to be calling another iPhone holder.
Ah, okay.
I see some comments in the chat about Facebook Live changing on Saturday. And I don't know, maybe Alan, you are more knowledgeable about this than I am, but I know YouTube as well has changed so that automatically your streams are streaming in a lower resolution because of the number of streams that were coming up. So people have to physically change the resolution on that. A lot of changes are happening in these platforms right now as they're trying to respond the same way we are to all of these demands. So I think they're learning along with us what will hold the amount of product that is coming into their system.
So
yeah, no,
this is not the place to
platforms
talk. Yeah, everybody's having trouble. The whole internet is shaking with the amount of weight we're putting on it. And this is not the platform where we should be talking about specific tools. We really want to talk about concepts and possibilities. But let me say, in Canada, if you're looking as a charitable organization for computer services and supplies, strongly recommend an agency called TechSoup, TechSoup.ca. TechSoup is a company in Canada that resells software and computer services to registered charities at vastly reduced prices. You can, if you're looking for Zoom, for example, you can get a pro account for Zoom at about 50% of the commercial rate, and it will allow for the dial-in access. You can also get the Microsoft Office suite for a fraction of the commercial price. if you're not already registered with them, it can take them a while to validate your charitable tax number. But once you have been able to demonstrate that you are in fact who you say you are and that you're entitled to it, it's a great resource to have a look at. Go and check that out if you're wanting to look at any of these different platforms. They have a wide variety of things there.
Yep.
So back up from the tech talk for a minute. What's the difference between online worship and streaming a sanctuary service? And what do we need to think about now that we can't be in our sanctuaries right now? My congregation has streamed the sanctuary service for 5 years. We've got a vast library of recordings at YouTube of me parading around in my gown in the sanctuary, but I can't do that now. So what should I be thinking about when I'm doing worship sitting here in my basement?
I think one of the
Andrea
big things
first.
from,
Go
sorry.
ahead, George,
Cool.
then.
One of the big things that I'm observing is that there are some issues related to the interactive nature of the worship service. And sometimes it doesn't work that smoothly when we're doing it online. Certainly if we're recording in advance, it limits the interaction of the congregation. And very often when we're doing it live streaming, people don't know how to handle a microphone when you put it in front of them. So we have to do some training. Or teach them how to use their microphone more effectively, if they're connecting the way we are today.
Or maybe ask them to put on a different headset so that you
That's
sound
right.
better. Thank you for doing that, George.
Welcome. I was hoping
Andrea,
you'd
how would you
noticed.
respond to that?
Yeah, so I think, where churches doing online things differ from businesses doing online things is that we're not in it to build an audience, we're in it to build relationships. And so the way that we use our technology has to respond to that very particular need. When you walk into a church building on a Sunday morning, there are certain things you notice and certain things that make you feel safe, secure, welcome, at home, whatever they may be. And we need to figure out how to translate those to our online space. So that is hugely visuals, which I know George and Alan can talk to you way more than I can. There's hosts and hospitality, like can we put someone there to greet people? There's this idea that, we, just because we're on a screen, we can't be seen. And that's what we need to break down. There's a wall there that we need to get rid of. So can we call people by name? Because they are showing up wanting to be known, and we have to be able to let them know that they are, especially in a time like right now. So it really is this translation piece. How do we move from what they would feel walking into a building to feeling that same thing online? And that could go for privacy and security as well. So taking all of those into consideration make the difference between just getting viewers and actually building relationships with those people.
Alan, what do you recommend for building relationship?
And I think we're all going to do it differently. I think Andrea had some great stuff. I think somebody who welcomes as people join in the chat. If you've got a platform where you're signing in like Zoom, where you're seeing people, you can have somebody say, welcome so-and-so, type it into the chat box every time, or you can be doing it. I actually think part of the, just chatting thing we were doing as we started, lends a comfort. It lends a familiarity. You're walking into a space where people are chatting already. And I think that makes a big difference. If we just had pre-recorded music, people think they're waiting on hold for the service to start. That's a whole different experience than when you come in and there's some liveliness. People are joking about each other. We talked about the weather. We talked about plants. We talked about all kinds of stuff. And people are eavesdropping in on that. And they're not really participating, but they are kind of, because they're thinking of their own thing. Some people were joining us in the chat box, participating in our conversation. And so I think that kind of friendly, chill atmosphere as people are gathering goes a long way.
Yeah, good point.
One of the options that Zoom gives you, and we talk about this platform because it's familiar to us. It's not the only one out there, but Zoom allows us to put people into small breakout rooms. Joe on the chat here in Zoom is saying that they're getting over 100 in his services, so they put them into smaller breakouts so that they can chit chat in sort of mini conferences for a while before they come back into the plenary. Powerful tool. Any of you ever used that one for your services?
I've not used breakout rooms for any of the services that I've done. No, but that's a good idea.
Yeah, breakout rooms are a great idea because I find when Zoom is sort of more than 2 pages of faces, you really get overwhelmed with what you're trying to manage. We don't worship on Zoom. We broadcast our services to YouTube. So I can't speak to that for worship, but I know as someone who's attended online Bible studies, breakout groups are amazing. However, one thing to caution is just that they almost feel mandatory because the host just throws you into one and all of a sudden you're there in an intimate space with 2 other people and you're like, oh, I guess I have to talk. So just again, know your people.
Yeah, no, that's fair. Alan, any comments or additions? You're putting thoughts in the Zoom chat here, but the people on YouTube can't read them, so you should say them aloud.
Well, I should. There was a question in there about phone participants on Zoom and the gathering or the breakouts or whatever, and you can on the Zoom platform, you can include all those people, whether they're phone or on the computer, just like any other person. When you're dealing with YouTube or Facebook Live or other platforms that aren't quite like a meeting where you're interacting, that's a different thing. But I still think on a platform like Facebook, Live or on YouTube, still hearing that conversation is a pleasant, welcoming way for people to come in. So you don't want to just hear chatter, but to hear something, it still totally works on all the different levels. If I was just calling in and overhearing a conversation, it's still me feeling like I'm hearing something.
In the worship that I'm leading, and again, we're doing this daily now, we have the mics open as people gather, and then I mute them all for the worship service. So just like we've got today, we don't have every dog barking and every siren going off. And then at the end, after we've had the benediction and kind of chilled, then I warn people that we're going into chaos, and I open the mics and they all say goodbye to each other. And I am going to try a virtual coffee hour at the end of worship this Sunday. We had about 35 in our worship service last Sunday, which is about half of my regular worshiping congregations. I think that was pretty exciting. But I'm going to warn them ahead of time that they don't have to stay if they don't want to, but that this is a possibility and that we'll do a virtual coffee hour for an extra 15 minutes after the service is over. And then see how they like it.
Stephen,
we're kind of learning and experimenting, right?
Yeah, I know of congregations in our area that are actually deliberately getting together for coffee hour throughout the week.
Mm-hmm.
So it's beyond Sunday worship, but it's ways in which they can continue to be the church together as a faith community.
My sense for the worshiping community that I'm leading daily is that the chit chat ahead of time and afterwards is as important as the worship that comes from. It's part of why they're there. The people who are on the phone are as excited about it as the people who are seeing each other's faces. And they're phoning their friends who aren't there and saying, you should come and try this. And so it's growing, which is kind of neat. And somebody on the chat was saying here, is there a way to reassure our seniors and others who are afraid? The way we've done it in my congregation is to have people who are participating phone them. Because if they get yet another call from the minister saying, we're missing you, they know that he's paid to do that. And he's just trying to drum up business, right? But if one of their best friends calls and says, I'm really enjoying this and come and try it with me, it makes a difference. And it builds that sense of connection. And I think that's one of the biggest theological needs we have right now that our worship is serving, is the sense of connectivity and being God's faithful community together.
Amen.
Anything else that you guys want to talk about sort of in general terms before we get into specific pieces of the worship service? Oh, I love this. Scott says his church is having a virtual potluck supper on Sunday night. That's brilliant.
It is. It is.
I wish I'd thought of that.
And I guess that kind of answers the question you just asked too, Steve, to me, is what's important is what you folks can do and what you need. So if you need a virtual potluck supper, have at her. If you can come, you can do whatever you can come up with. If you can't figure out how, get in touch with one of us. We'll help you figure it out.
Oh, sure.
Stuff can be done.
And we'll steal your ideas.
You're comfortable in what you need and what your folks want and need.
Well, and that's a great point, Stephen, because it's not mandatory that you create your stuff from scratch. We don't all have time to do that. There's amazing resources out there, a lot of them for free, that you can take and repost. Children's programming, children's times, the virtual meal plans, like where virtual seders are happening this week. And, there's a whole bunch of different things that already exist out there that you can piggyback on. And I think this is a really beautiful opportunity to sort of reach beyond our initial worshiping community and to collaborate with some groups that are around us, with congregations we might not have a chance to, and see what they're doing and how we can share those resources.
Well, I think we can extrapolate from things that we do in our normal daily lives and bring that into a worship experience. We used to send dinner to our granddaughter when she was away at college. We'd send frozen packages of meals to her, and then we would arrange on a Wednesday night, we're going to get together for dinner, and we would all sit down to the same meal together. So we can take ideas like that and take it even further then as part of a worship experience, part of being a faith community.
And not just worship experience. I mean, I have a son in Scotland and a daughter in St. Louis and a daughter in Vancouver.
Sure.
And we're all gathering online for a birthday party for me on Saturday.
How wonderful.
Awesome.
How wonderful.
Well, and this kind of work too is empowering people who have not so far been comfortable using this technology in so many other areas of their life as well. If we have the patience to teach someone how to get onto YouTube or use FaceTime or use Zoom, then that opens it up to them being able to use it for exactly that, for a grandchild's birthday party or for anything like that. So yep. I think that it's a wider invitation for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say there are some concerns floating around the internet about Zoom security and strangers coming in and doing nasty things. And that is happening a little bit, not a lot, but the press stories are real. Just a quick thought, if people are using this technology, for example, what would you suggest as ways to keep things secure? I mean, it's easy if there was just the four of us meeting, we can quickly boot somebody out. But today we've got like 300 people watching us. What do we do to keep the meeting focused on the topic and not get bombed by pornography or something awful like that?
Well, I think you've already done part of that by locking down microphones. And have you turned off share for everybody except co-hosts?
I have.
That's another way of securing this. And so if you're the host setting up a Zoom meeting, you have that kind of control. The other would be that once you've got everybody in the meeting, you can lock the room so no one else can come in.
Yeah, no, I didn't lock the room today because there's very little bit, with all the other things locked down, there's very little that a stranger could do to
exactly.
disrupt anything we're doing here.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, but you can also turn off the chat.
Yep.
If you don't need, if you're not going to use, nobody's monitoring, people can do crazy stuff there. If that's a concern, you can turn that off. You can also set up passwords for your meetings if you want. One thing that I think is actually pretty reasonable is is to just be more aware if you're posting the link publicly, right?
Yes.
Because people are trolling for the Zoom link. And so to use a different link every time, if you're posting it publicly, helps as well, because if they find an old one, they don't get the new one. So it's an old meeting maybe they found. So if you're going to post publicly, you might want to be more aware. But if you're not posting your Zoom link publicly and nobody knows it, they don't know it.
You're not going to worry about it.
They're not going to find it. So you can share more privately as well to just reduce that from happening.
Yeah, I would affirm the comment in the chats that waiting rooms are really important as well. So you can see who's coming into the room, at least at the start. The only other thing I would add to what everyone else is saying is, if possible, to delegate a spotter in your room to look at the chat, to flip through the screens of faces, just to see if they catch anything that looks unusual, any comments, any new pictures that sort of seem out of place, and to not have that just be on the facilitator, because it can all be a lot quite overwhelming.
Yeah. The prayer meeting that was interrupted for the moderator the other night, the 4 people who were in the room, if you looked at the way the names were printed on the screen, they too were pornographic. So there are ways of picking it up.
Yeah. So it happens, but there are ways to protect yourself. And again, any tool that is powerful can be used for good or for ill, right? So we try to make sure that we know the tools well enough that we keep the focus on what we're trying to do. Anything else sort of generally that any of you want to say about what we're doing and how to build community online before we dive into sort of different pieces of worship?
Meg Gilman writes that she had a message during Zoom that looks like a part of Zoom that said that their audio was not working. Enter your administrator password to fix the problem. And they've since had some difficulty with their computers having done that.
I think I would just like to, before moving on from sort of how this is different from worship in the sanctuary, I would just like to say that I really believe that the Spirit works in this weird internet place. We don't know how the internet works. We don't understand the Spirit and all of the ways that she works either. And I think that it's really important to recognize this as being holy ground that our people join us on. We've forever been ministering to people on the margins, and online ministry, whether it's in this time or in general, is really a chance to do that, to reach into places where people have otherwise been left. So I just I affirm anyone that is undertaking this, because I just feel that it's really important.
I agree.
A couple of questions on YouTube about Zoom and telephone numbers and so on. Let me say really clearly, because I've had a couple of questions in my chat, Zoom is free for participants. If you've got people in your congregation who want to participate in a worship service or a meeting or something or other, it's free to participate, whether you're doing it on the computer or on your smartphone or on a local dial-in telephone number. So nobody in your congregation has to pay a penny. The only person who has to pay is the host, and that's if you're getting a paid account. So if people write to you and say, I couldn't use Zoom because it costs money, it's not true, and figure out what's going wrong there. A couple of people have thought they had to buy a pro account in order to participate in a meeting. They don't. There are only about 5 different area codes in Canada where Zoom has a dial-in number. So if Zoom is the platform you choose, you're limited to those 5 dial-in numbers if people want to be on the phone. Lots of people, but not everybody, has a telephone plan that allows for dialing within the province or dialing within the country. And if you're in rural and remote northern Canada, and people are wanting to connect by telephone, you might well encourage them to get one of those telephone plans if this is going to be a regular thing, because the long distance charges to call the 647 number or the 443 number, those will add up if people are paying long distance charges for that. So be aware of that. The General Council account has bought a pool of long distance toll-free numbers. So we buy, I think it's 2 hours a month of toll-free time. We pay 4 cents a minute for people who use that 1-800 number. That's not a regular feature in the basic paid Zoom account. You'd have to pay extra for that. So if Zoom is your platform and you choose to go for it, if the 1-800 access is important to you, there'd be an extra charge, and you should kind of look through your options around that too. But there's no charge for basic dial-in access to one of the Canadian area codes. How many people can dial in per number? I had a meeting last week where a couple of people couldn't get in just because Zoom was maxed out. But most of the Zoom accounts that are available to congregations, you have 100 seats in the room, and it doesn't matter whether people are connecting by telephone or by computer. If you need more than that, then you talk to Zoom and get a bigger account. The ones that we're using through the General Council office allow us 300 seats. And as you see, we've maxed those out this week too. But given the fact that our telephone system across Canada has been struggling as badly as the internet, it's always possible people won't go in just because our infrastructure is struggling with the pandemic usage.
Yep.
But you should be able to get in with either telephone or computer to the maximum of your license. Yeah, Andrea Allen says she knows some churches who are buying long distance calling cards and handing them out to people to call into the long distance numbers. Great option. Thanks
Yeah,
for
great
suggesting
option.
it. So particular pieces of worship services then, because we've gone about half of our time, and I think it's good to pivot to sort of specific issues. We've talked a little bit about the welcome that happens beforehand. Anybody got anything else to add to the things we've already said?
So I had an example, but I don't need to show it. However, if I share my screen, I can just reinforce some of those ideas that came up. So one of the pieces that we do before worship service, of course, I freeze frames always pick the most awkward positions, is really this moment where we get to bridge the gap between the living room and the liturgy, right? So we've talked a little bit about how you have the trickling in of people. This was done last Sunday, and so we obviously had no people here in the building. But what are the things that can sort of give people the information that's necessary for them to worship sort of as seamlessly as possible? So in this little welcome bit, you'll see I give people instructions on how to use the chat in the box here on this side. One of the security features is you can actually turn off the live chat replay. So once your video is finished being live, people can't see this chat anymore. I just re-enabled it for this demonstration, but I also invite people to give prayers during this time. So you can see the conversation is happening here, but we invite prayers because our practice, and I know the gentlemen here have a bit of a different system in place for prayers, so we all do this differently, but the prayer requests that get written in the chat box down here during this time are then sent to the lead minister or whoever is doing the prayers of the people to then share those from the pulpit out loud. And that's a way it started, because on Sunday mornings when we had a congregation in person and a congregation worshiping online, they could see each other and get to know who each other were praying for. But while we're all online, of course, some of those needs have changed a little bit. So the question of whether or not we need to speak those prayers out loud maybe has come up a couple of times. So this is the welcome space that is really, this isn't a call to worship. This is very much a what you need to know. We've used this space for education, so how to use the chat. More recently, we've used it for education that is, we can see the same screen you can. So if you have the spinning wheel of death, like our tech people are on it, so we don't need 47 people typing in the chat box at the same time that their screen is frozen. You know, maybe you need to refresh your screen, maybe it's us, but we're on it. So anything like that, how you're receiving offering that day, if you're not doing a formal invitation, this is just a really good opportunity to, once again, bridge that gap between where they're coming from and where they're going, and sort of get rid of all the housekeeping before it starts, and again, have people get to introduce where they're coming from in that space there. So just one idea to sort of bringing people into the space and centering them before the worship actually begins.
Great, thanks.
A culmination of all of your best practices that you've mentioned.
There we go. So either of you, George or Ellen, want to add anything to thoughts around the welcome at the beginning before things really begin? One of the things I've started doing in these webinars is putting the countdown timer on. Yeah. Which really helps people know that this is for real and that it hasn't started yet.
And again, it gives them a chance to test out their equipment, right? Because there is that sense of panic before it starts. Is it going to work for me? So yes, it gives them a 5-minute heads up that it is in fact going to work for you.
I got a really, really easy to use, simple timer out of the Windows store. It was free.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah.
Anything else about welcome, or should we move on to music?
Let's go on to music.
Music. So we can't sing in unison. What the heck do we do? We like to sing. I mean, gosh, I think singing is even more important than preaching in the United Church. What do we do?
Well, one of the things I've tried to do is to find pieces of music that folks are likely to know. And I found some that certainly have moved my soul at any rate. And I love to share them with folks and know that they're tunes that they can pick up. And so I have some favorites that I go to. One of them is by a United Church minister, Joe Ramsey. And around communion time, and especially we're going to be talking at some point about communion in a virtual space, there's a piece that he wrote called Sweet Communion. It is an amazingly powerful piece. Can I share just the opening of it,
Yeah,
Stephen?
please do, go ahead.
Okay. I just need to find my, oh, there we go. So I'm looking at my desktop one. I'm going to play Sweet Communion for you, and I'll expand my screen. Can you hear that?
No, I don't think you've enabled the audio.
Okay, let me pause it.
Yeah. So stop the sharing, and then when you get then share again. But when you get the share pop-up box, you know. Okay, good.
Okay, just one moment.
The audio might not have started yet either, so that could have been the thing. I thought maybe I heard something just as you popped.
Have you got it now?
Now I'm just seeing your desktop.
You're not getting it.
So one of the interesting things about doing stuff live is that it doesn't always work. And I think it's important for all of us who are worship leaders to be willing to flex to that. That's just true. If we have the option, the way the moderator does, of recording our service on Tuesday night and then having a professional video editor fix all the bloopers before Sunday morning, oops, did I let the cat out of the bag that he was doing that? Then it's easy to make a mistake. But this is the nature of the beast. And you know what? We make mistakes on Sunday mornings too. Sometimes the mic isn't on. Sometimes the PowerPoint slides go south. Sometimes a little kid starts to cry in the middle of the sermon. Don't panic when that happens. And don't feel like that's a problem with the system. We are human and we make mistakes. And fortunately, God loves us anyway. And we are a community who will laugh together and celebrate in grace. And God is present in the midst of that. So I am filling in as carefully as I can, George, while you scramble. Do you want to try again?
Yes, please. I found it for Safari now. I had it playing in Google Chrome, and my system doesn't particularly like it when I do that. So let me try that again. Thanks.
Sure.
This might work better for us this time. Are you getting it now?
Yes.
Thank you.
I'd seen her sometimes from afar, pushing her wire cart down door, filled with everything she needs to keep her life secure. She beckoned me down the alleyway, see what she had found. A crate of oranges, mostly good, some were sweet and ripe and round.
Okay, so since we're in demonstration mode and not worship mode, I cut that off because I want to keep moving things. But you raise an important point for me. We've got Joe Ramsey on the line today. I hope you asked his permission to use that for this webinar. And
Fortunately,
if you didn't, you maybe owe him some money. Talk to us about copyright. And what about when we want to stream something from YouTube? And how, Joe, thank you. You're so gracious. He says, no problem. But I figured you would, or I wouldn't have mentioned it. but George or Andrea or Alan, talk to us about copyright and how we manage that with music.
If we're using stuff from Voices United and whatnot, we actually have a licensing podcast live stream license to cover the use of that. At least as far as I can tell, we've got that covered from one license.
Yeah,
So-
one license and licensing are good, and CCLI as well will cover a lot of Christian music, especially the contemporary Christian music. Something I just learned today, and then I'll leave it with Alan because he might know better, is that so YouTube itself is not going to stick you with copyright anything unless you're monetizing what you're putting out. So that was kind of news to me, and it might be wrong, so take that with a grain of salt. Alan's okay. And then Facebook, one of the things that Facebook will often do is if their algorithm notices that you've streamed a song that is inappropriate, they'll just mute it. So oftentimes you won't even get a message, you'll just be playing your worship and it'll be muted. So that usually doesn't happen when a service goes live. It'll happen after it's been recorded. So at that point you might need to edit it out or do something like that. But Alan, to you.
No, that's the second part definitely true. Facebook often just mutes those bits. YouTube sometimes will, sometimes they'll take down. If it's an algorithm that does it, so they don't even know if you have a license. So if you're like George and you've got the appropriate license, unless you've gone through the process already with YouTube and or Facebook, they don't necessarily know that. And even if you've gone through the process, the algorithm doesn't always know that, right? Yeah. So you could still have stuff taken down. So you got to be ready for that. Always have your appropriate license. Always. It's important. You know, this is people's livelihood. We want to make sure they get their money.
And one license is offering it free right now.
That's
for
right.
Churches that are streaming during the pandemic.
Yeah. And one thing to remember too, though, is, and I'm going to hit gray area, and some people won't like what I'm saying, but if you're not using the YouTube in your service, but you're sending people a link, like I showed you the PDF that had the link in it. Linking to a YouTube is taking people and you're sending them to YouTube. And then YouTube is worrying about whether their content is properly copywritten or not or whatever. So that is not our problem. So using it in a live stream is one thing. You got to be careful. You have your licensing, yada, yada. If you're doing up a text document and you want people to be able to listen to music or sing along or whatever, and you're sending them directly to YouTube, then that's legit.
That's
because
fine,
it's not,
because then YouTube is playing on the participant screen.
That's right. So that's a way to kind of work within, around, whatever, some of those stuff that already exists. You can say, okay, pause now. Let's all click this link I post in the chat right now and watch this YouTube video, and then we all come back. And you're not live streaming it. You're not using it. You're sending people so that it's appropriately dealt with in that platform, be it YouTube, Vimeo, wherever.
Yeah. I think that's one of those places where there's a gray area, though, isn't it?
Yeah, it clearly can be.
No,
but there's no way around it. If you're directing.
Yeah, there's three different options here. Option one is to get your license and to embed the music into the stream the way that you just did, George, by showing us a YouTube video through our stream. You need to have a license to show that music in your stream.
Okay.
And so we would need to have a license to broadcast Joe's piece of music the way that you just did. What Alan is suggesting is different from that. He's suggesting you just put a link on the screen, everybody clicks that link and they watch it themselves. Yeah. That's entirely legit. Now, there are two different kinds of licenses you can buy from these licensing services. One of them allows you to print the words in your bulletin and show it in church, and the other allows you to actually put it in the live stream. You need the second level in order to do the online worship stuff. You can't get away with just saying, well, we have permission to reprint in our bulletins. You need the second level of license, not that much more expensive. But you have to pay for it, and and it does not cover every license in our books. So there are the best advice really is to go to the United Church General Council page, type in copyright guidelines, and find the most recent document we have up there. We have spreadsheets that list all of the different hymns in our hymn books and which license covers them. Don't choose a hymn that isn't covered. So double check it while you're planning your worship service before you actually go live. You will still find that sometimes YouTube flags a piece of music, especially if it's a moldy oldie, because some commercial artist has recorded Amazing Grace or He Walks in the Garden or something or other. And even though the hymn is in the public domain, that particular recording isn't. And then you challenge YouTube and say, well, yeah, we're not playing that, you know, Elvis Presley's recording. We're playing my congregation singing it with our local pianist, and they take it down again. Be especially careful if you're embedding commercial videos. We embedded a commercial video once in our live stream. It was a wonderful video, and one of the pieces of music on it, even though the video itself said it was available for Creative Commons, the producer made a mistake, and one of the pieces of music in that video was actually copyright. He had licensed it to that viewer, but we didn't have the license, and YouTube shut us down. We had to pay some money to get our stream back. So that was not fun. To be cautious and read that document carefully around music.
Certainly at St. John's, for the stuff that we're doing, we have that extended license for using the text for the hymns in our worship. And one of the reasons why I'm not a big fan of live streaming is that if we have used a video in worship, usually there is a link that we can click and it's presented on our screens, but that gets recorded in a live stream. If I'm recording ahead of time, it means I can edit that out before we post.
Yeah.
And I can just replace that with the URL of the video. People can then go to that themselves.
Let's call a spade a spade. It's confusing. Yes, it is.
It is.
Sure, it is. That's true. It's not impossible. And the licensing agencies make it a whole lot simpler. If you are only using music that you have double checked ahead of time that you have the license to use, you'll be fine. And if the YouTube robots flag it, then you challenge the flag and say, here's my license number, and they take it down again. It's a pain. And it's all done by robots. It's not done by people. I would say once a month, I'm dealing with a copyright flag. And I just, even though I've put my license on the screen and I put it in the comments and all of that, the robots don't read any of that. So I have to actually protest their protest, and it goes away again.
Yeah, I've had to deal with two.
CCLI and the One License websites are really good in terms of offering help and reporting techniques and all the variety of music they're servicing. In 2025, we are coming out with a new online music resource, and there will be streaming permissions built into every piece.
Wow.
2025. Even when More Voices was produced, nobody had heard of podcasting. Like, this technique is so new. We looked at one point in the General Counsel office to go back to look at all the copyright holders for every piece in Voices United, and the staff time and the rights were going to be almost $1 million. So we didn't. So this is why we're saying everybody has to get their licenses. But when Sing 2025 comes out, some of this will be much, much easier. It's not going to help us during the pandemic.
No.
Anything else you guys want to say about music?
One of the things I'm looking for, one of the things, the questions that we had when we first got together was, are you changing the kind of music that you're using right now? And I'm trying to find songs that build hope, songs of grace, songs of thankfulness. Those kinds of things are the emphasis that I'm placing on the music that we choose right now.
Sure. In our Sunday worship, we had our organist sitting at the grand piano in her home, playing the hymns and singing for us. We can't sing in unison, but she had her mic open. Her piano was beautiful. We muted everybody else's mic, and we all sang along with her and put the words up on the screen. And then her children came along with stuffed animals, and the visuals were absolutely amazing. So there's a blessing and a curse to having live music and having recorded music. And we are doing a mixture of both. Very quickly, let me show you a piece of music that we used last night in, hang on, where is it? In our worship service. Move things out of the way so I can play it. I'll just show you 30 seconds of this so that you can see what our, here we go.
Jesus came bringing
Okay, so you get the idea. One of the things that my office admin has been madly learning this week is how to do video editing. So Nancy has been recording these on her iPhone. She's been sending them to Chanel, and Chanel and Paul together have gone back and forth in the background to produce these recordings, which then I can drop into the 6 o'clock worship service liturgy, and I look like a pro, but I haven't done a darn thing. So it's amazing how we can be creative. And of course, that's a piece that we have the rights to. So music. We're looking at our time here. We've got about 20 minutes left. What about sermons? Do we need a 20-minute monologue? Does that work online? Alan, you're laughing at me.
and I kind of laughing. I mean, it can. It absolutely can. Should that be our default? No. You know, I think, to me, the best comparison to what a good online sermon can look like, be framed like, whatever. Don't expect to do this quality necessarily, but like people watch TED Talks, right? TED Talks are a huge thing. People will watch them. It's a person talking for 10 minutes max. 10 minutes max. That's a TED Talk, right? You'll have max. Some will go a little, but you're really keeping it usually 7-ish minutes, and they're engaging. They're active. They're not just sitting here talking at their screen, trying to impart something, looking at their notes, right? Like, they're giving you a performance, but we'll watch those. So if you can do that, if you can, you know, if you're comfortable and engaging, people will watch you for 7 to 10 minutes.
But you know,
if
the
you're not
TED
sure you're at
Talks,
that
they
level,
use at least, with TED Talks, they're using at least 5 different cameras.
oh yeah, they're totally.
They're professionally produced video-wise.
Oh, they're produced, totally. But we will watch them, right? And I think, you know, yes, your video's changing. You want to put some edits if you can, if you want to keep that. But I think there's a capacity for people to do that time when it's really good. And if you've had people tell you you're amazing and they're willing to watch you for that long, then that's when you can start doing that. But I'd start at 2, 3, 5. That's a time where you're watching one camera angle, you're potentially closer, you know, but if you can spread it out and make it a little bit bigger, then it also changes things up. If you have the capacity to edit a little bit, even if you only have one camera, and to zoom in, out, to just be that little video change, you know, you can get a little bit longer. But a 15 or 20-minute piece can sometimes feel painful. And when it's a live setting, you might lose people completely. If it's a recorded, you might just have people skipping through. So then you want to make sure you're covering yourself more. No, you want to be careful with what you're doing, because it's a whole different space. And it depends where you're all watching to really get it going.
So the people in the Zoom chat here are agreeing with you. You know, short, conversational, 7 minutes max, says Jennifer in Quebec. What's your experience, Andrea?
Well, I was just going to piggyback on what Alan said and point out that the energy with which we are delivering sermons these days is a lot different than what we might be used to delivering them with, especially if we're preaching to our kitchen wall or to sanctuary filled with absolutely no one, right? Like, did it land? Did it not? Are people moved by it? Are they not? And so there's a great quote from Frank A. Thomas where he says when he's preparing a sermon, he has to ghost himself up. Like, he has to bring the fire himself. And I feel like that's something that we're having to do a lot these days, is build up that energy so that we can speak truth to our people. And it's exhausting. And so, like, I agree with Alan, like, the people do have the capacity to deliver and to hear those messages. But right now, like, shorter, I'm like, the comments are saying sort of 7 to 12 minutes. And like, I'm right with you in that sense, because it's really hard to do it in this way. So whatever you need to do to ghost yourself up, as Frank would say, I guess, however long that lasts.
I did mine last Sunday in 2 pieces with some music and just reflection time in the middle.
Yeah.
We read the first part of the Ezekiel passage and I talked about it for a few minutes. We had a piece of music. Then we read the second part of the Ezekiel passage and I talked again. That seemed to work better than trying to string it all together in one. George.
That's the plan I'm planning on using this Sunday. Certainly, we're not going to go for an hour of worship on Palm Sunday this time because we're doing it on the phone. And any message that I might have for Palm Sunday, I'm going to try and spread it out throughout that 30-minute conversation online.
Cool.
And
I
I think
asked
Andrew
everybody in the
brought up a thing
congregation
for
to
me.
go out and buy some, go out and cut some
Nope.
branches off the local tree and wave it for Palm Sunday. So we'll see how many of them actually do, but it might be really fun.
Well, actually, one of the messages I'm getting is, we got our palms. What do I do with them?
Okay,
Sorry, Steve, can I
prayers.
jump in quick?
Go ahead, Alan.
Andrew just reminded me something about the energy. And I've always when I record sermons for my resource, I'm always telling people the camera cuts 50% of your energy. So move your hands, put your passion into it. Every response you want from whatever joke or whatever thing you're giving, expect that everybody reacted 100% with that energy and then give it back to them. So you really want to feel that and give it. Andrea was saying earlier about this Zoom fatigue thing. And that's because when you know what you're doing, you're turning yourself on double, triple, just to have a normal conversation meeting because you know you need to. So it's way more work. And my spouse is yelling at me all the time that I'm talking to her like I'm in a meeting. She's like, turn yourself off, because I'm just presenting all day long because I'm doing 3 of these a day. And that's just how I'm feeling all the time.
I hear you. I'm going to move us along because we've got 15 minutes left. Andrea, you were telling us about prayers in your setting. So tell us how you do it, and then the others may have other ideas.
Yeah, so again, it's morphing as the times morph for sure. But up to this point, we've asked for prayer requests in the chat box, via email throughout the week for congregants that never gather with us in person, and on Facebook. And so people can send those to me. I happen to be the one that gathers them, and then they get spoken aloud during the service from the pulpit or wherever the prayers of the people are being done. And that it's really an opportunity for, again, that wall between the in-person people and the online people to sort of dissolve. They get to hear what each other are praying for. Again, as I mentioned, if we're all in one online space, there might be different ways to experiment with that. The prayers might be the prayers as they are written in the box. If you're on Zoom, I know, Stephen, you'll probably speak to your experience just speaking the prayers and having sort of a round robin. But our experience has been that for people who feel like they're invisible because they're online, typing something in a box and then hearing it being read out loud has been really, really powerful.
Thank you. George, anything you're doing with prayers online that would be helpful to share? Your mic is muted, George. George, I can't hear you. Hang on. There, try again.
No, the stuff that we're doing right now is all pre-recorded. We're not doing much in the way of live streaming at the moment. And so everything is pre-planned. And if we've got people that are going to be doing prayer, then that's recorded ahead of time and it's spliced together as part of the service that's going to go out. So that's not become an issue until this Sunday will be a little different. And I think tomorrow part of what I will be doing is phoning people and asking them some of the questions. And that comes out of some of the things that Andrea just finished saying, and Alan as well, so that they feel more included in what we're going to do on Sunday.
Alan, anything you want to add? You're also
I will,
muted.
because I was typing, and so then I had to stop typing and unmute to do it.
Thank you.
Yeah, some of the comments in the chat box are about people's comfort and privacy and sharing their prayers and whatever too. And I think we have to, we're trying to not have crazies in our online worship, but crazies can walk in your door any day. Like public worship is public worship, and public prayers are public prayers. And for some people, that's great and good and important. And for other people, that can be kind of scary. I know people who don't want to be prayed for on Sunday because the 10 of us is too many. They don't need that many people to know that they want prayer. For some people, it's fine. You can just use first names. There's ways to kind of be respectful of what people's needs are. It's also, I mean, yes, it is public, but let's really be honest here. how many people are watching your worship service? Like, you know, you were happy with 35, Steve. Like, that's, I'm guessing that it's not YouTube's highest watch video of the week, or that it's going to pop up anywhere. Like, yes, we want to be cognizant and recognize people's privacy. I'm not trying to make too much light of it, but it's worth being honest and reasonable too. Like 500 people aren't going to show up Sunday morning. 500 people aren't going to show up and watch your worship service either. So let's try and check what we're expecting and what we're concerned about with what a probable reality is too. And if I'm wrong and you get those 5,000 people, good on you, and deal with that problem instead.
I think that's fair. And I think different congregations have different prayer practices as well. And all of the confidentiality concerns that people are raising in the Zoom chat here are the same kinds of concerns that get raised in prayers of the people generally in sanctuary worship. So let me tell you briefly about the practice that's evolving in my congregation. We have for the last couple of years in our sanctuary worship invited people to contribute to the prayers of the people at the time when we do that. We've had a prayer book at the back of the church for years, and we'll get maybe one comment in it. But worship committee said, why don't we try inviting comments from the floor? So on a typical Sunday morning, I take a binder and I go and stand in the middle of the congregation and I ask two questions. What are we thankful for? And what are we concerned about? And I write these down, and it's amazing that I can read them at all because I scribble so quickly. And then I weave together a prayer based on what they say. And so when we started worshiping online, I tried the same process. And I asked people, what are we thankful for? And they would start adding to the chat. And then I would say, what are we concerned about? And for the people who didn't have access to the chat because they were only on the telephone, I opened the phone mics. And after we'd done that about 3 times, I realized that I didn't need to weave together anything. That their comments written in the chat were the prayer. It wasn't me creating the list. And so nowadays, I open the phone mics, we leave the computer mics muted, people type in the chat what they're thankful for, and I just read it gently out loud. And then I weave together some kind of transition into, you know, out of our gratitude we are concerned about. And then people write those things, and I just read them out loud so that the people listening on the phone can hear, and so that the people who are not wanting to read the chat can also hear, because some people like to pray with their eyes closed. And my goodness, it's been profound and deep and moving, and it has worked. But it works for my congregation with my people, partly because of the pattern we had in the sanctuary at the time. And so it enhances the sense of connection, and it reminds them of what we used to do when we were in the building. And I would say each congregation is likely to evolve a pattern that reflects themselves and how that works. Anything any of you want to add before we jump into offering? Because we've got about 8 minutes left here.
There's tons. I can go for hours, but let's keep going.
We hate talking about money, don't we? I mean, we are so middle class that talking about money is much harder than talking about sex, I think. And yet we are in the biggest financial crises that our congregations have ever been in. Our liturgy tends to put offering as a response to the word. And I think that's profound and deep and theologically really valuable. And I wanted to share with you just 1 minute of how the moderator introduced the offering portion of his online service that will be played this Sunday. This is not the whole offering, and he goes on to talk about online giving tools and Canada Helps and the rest, but this is how he pitched it to start with. Listen to this.
As we remember who we are called to be, as we remember that we are called to be people of love, as we remember that we are called to be neighbors to the world, I'm going to ask you if you can take just a moment to think about the gifts that God has placed in you. What is one way that you could use the gifts that God has placed in you to stand in the face of fear, to show love? Love of God, love of your neighbor, love of yourself during the coming week. It could be something like, I don't know, putting a colored heart in your window. It could be sending a message to someone who you think might very well need a contact, or picking up the phone. It could be something else that you know you can do or be. It could be lifting up someone in prayer. But whatever it is that your gift calls you to, I invite you to think about that.
So he segues from there to picking up a bowl and saying, put your gift here in this offering plate. And he segues from there to saying, here are the online tools that you might want to use. I thought this was just brilliant. What a wonderful way to remind us all what the offering is. It's not the church needs your money now. It's God needs you. And let's together figure out what we have to offer to God. So I did this in my church service last week, and we went from there to put up a description of each of the online giving tools that are available on our church website. The response was terrific, and I commend it to you. I'm going to get to the communion stuff. I promise. It's actually the next slide, so thank you for asking. But before we jump there, Andrea, Alan, George, anything you want to add about offering before we jump onto the communion thing?
I think we're aware at our church right now, we have about 6 or 7 other congregations that are worshiping with us. So we've taken the offering out because there's no passing of the plate. So the time doesn't really make a difference. Inviting people to give to their own communities has been really important. And then we've actually used the time instead to introduce people to, this past week, we introduced people to the needs of First United Ministries here in Vancouver. Some of these other local ministries that are dealing with this pandemic in a way that local congregations aren't. So maybe just, again, being creative with the ways that we're extending that invitation, and knowing who's actually watching.
Yeah. We do much like Richard did in that video clip, and remind people that offering isn't just money. It's time, talents, energy, all of those things. And so give in whatever way you can to not only our own faith community, but to people within our community at large. It's bigger than just our faith community.
So having said that, Dave Jagger, who is a colleague of mine in our philanthropy unit, is trying to get a sense of what other churches are doing. He's put this invitation on Facebook, and I'm offering it here too. If you'd like to help them figure out what's working and what's grace-filled and what makes sense in this medium, we're all creating this together. Feel free to be part of his study, and he would be delighted to get your feedback. Communion. Is it allowed? This is the most complicated theological topic that we seem to have in worship these days, and there are theologians in North America all across the spectrum on this. I went and asked for some specific advice from our official theologians in the denomination. And here's what they said, and I thought this was beautifully put. We think of communion as a time when we come together as a community to celebrate this sacrament. Indeed, celebrating the sacrament in community and as a community is an important part of the sacrament in United Church tradition. When a community of faith gathers in a live streamed service, we remain a community. And so much of what we've talked about together today has been ways to enhance, nurture, and strengthen that sense of us being a gathered community. This is true even though we're not physically in the same space, and we are participating virtually gathered as individuals or family groups. So on that basis, Daniel Hayward, the chairperson of the Committee of Theology, Faith, and Dr. John Young, who is our senior staff person who has responsibility for theological leadership, they're both recommending if your congregation is used to celebrating communion and you want to do it, that seems valid and important, and go for it. When the General Council gathers online for their annual meetings, they celebrate communion together and the moderator presides. And all of us who are participating in the meeting have some bread and some wine beside our computers. We are community together. So There you go. There's more controversy about recorded services, Sharon. Some people are comfortable with recorded services, other people are not. Dan and John stayed silent on that question and really left it to those of you who are worship leaders to determine what it means to be gathered community. How far does that extend? But let's remember that communion is an act of community. It is those of us who gather at Christ's table to eat and drink the heavenly meal together. So as long as we understand that that this is what we're doing, here's the recommendation that we've received from our theology and faith people. Dan Hayward actually is online. How about that? He says our current policy didn't address recorded services, as that really wasn't a possibility even in 2015. Sure, and this is evolving. And as I said to Dan and John a couple of days ago, sometimes our practice leads our theology, and maybe that's the way it needs to be. The question for me is this authentic? Is God present? And are we enabling people to connect with each other and with God in profound and sacramental ways? We've lost Andrea. That's the nature of the internet, I think. I hope she rejoins us, and I'm sorry she's gone because, oh, hang on, she's come in, she's just stopped being a co-host. Andrea, you're back and you have the right to turn on your camera. Nope, wrong Andrea, I'm sorry. Let me try again. I think the Andrea I'm waiting for her internet must have died. That's, again, the nature and the struggle of being live in these kinds of settings. We have reached the top of the hour. George and Alan, since we're missing our partner, any last words you want to add to our gathering before we sign off?
Only that I know that today our moderator posted his thoughts on this whole issue around communion and virtual space. And so that's on the United Church of Canada website, his thoughts on that and and how he views communion in a recorded setting as well. So people might like to go to the United Church of Canada website and see that message that he's posted.
Thank you. Alan?
And I'll just move us as we're ending to the ending. And so we're ending at our time, and it's important to end at the time. But whether you want to do a coffee hour, formally or informally, just like it's important to welcome folks at the beginning, it's important to see them off at the end. And Steve's going to do a formal one, but I always just like to sit around and yap with folks as they feel like it, and let folks turn on mics and let the world go crazy and wild. Focus on the chat. Somebody wants a private conversation, set that up. So just be open and depending on your group and available to keep that comfort level going when the platform allows for it, of course.
Thank you. Comments in the chat about what happens if you don't have grape juice in your house and you can't get to the store. Thank you, Dan, for pointing out that in Nicaragua, he remembers celebrating communion with tortilla and a local fruit juice. I did an internship in the Philippines and we did the same kind of thing. Like Jesus was using the common food. That was the point of it, right? We are gathered not to worry about the brand of juice, but to be in communion with each other and with the divine. It feels like a romp. It feels like we have got so much more to say, and the comments in the chat have been flying by, and I haven't even been able to pick up as many as I would have liked because, but you've been talking to each other, and that's even more important than just listening to the four of us. Next week, we've set aside this time on Thursdays for support for ministers and worship leaders and sort of congregational programming. Not exactly sure what's appropriate to do on Monday, Thursday. Are you over your head busy and unable to come on a Thursday? Should we skip it for a week? Have you got worries about how to do the Easter services and want to kind of pursue that with colleagues? Do you want to delve deeper into some of the things we've talked about today? Is there something totally different? If you could just add to the chat, just as you leave, a few extra things, topics that you'd really like us to address. Golly, we pulled this one together with a planning meeting on Monday morning, and I think it went off reasonably well under the circumstances. We can do that again, even though it's Holy Week. So let me know what you'd like to talk about, and we'll do our best to pull out all the stops and have some continued strong time together as church leaders in this strange and important time together. In the meantime, what a wonderful time it's been, and to each of you, thank you. I'm kind of looking at my other screen here to see if Andrea's joined us again. I think her internet's gone south, and I'm so sorry, because I really appreciated her contributions.
Yes.
Really appreciated George's, yours, and Alan too. What fun it's been to talk with people who are doing this all the time and come from it from different perspectives, and we use different tools and have different audiences, and I've learned so much just listening to the three of you. Thank you for helping us through this. Alan, tell us a little bit about the courses you run, just as people are closing out. If you want to go, folks, feel free. But
yeah, so I've been working, and same with Andrea, for Leadership. It's an initiative of Pacific Mountain region. So leadershippm.com is their website, and we're running all kinds of courses. So I've been doing quick and dirty live streaming, as well as worship options in a time of physical distancing are the 2 workshops I've been doing. Andrea's been doing how to engage people a little bit more. There's Zoom webinars, beginning, middle, 3rd level, lots of stuff going on. So if that kind of more technical, in-depth stuff is help, they're free. There's an Instagram one that they've posted this week. I just saw it this morning. So just lots of stuff to try and help people engage with stuff right now.
So if you want the nuts and bolts, some of the stuff where we couldn't get into the weeds today, check out Leadership. They've got some great stuff going on. If you wanted just a basic introduction to Zoom, because you've decided that since we're using it, that's the platform for you, lots of our regional councils are running kind of Zoom 101 tutorials. It seems like almost daily, but certainly at least once or twice a week. Check out what your regional council has to offer. If you've got other questions, comments, concerns, wishes for this time slot, send me an email, and I'd love to hear them. We want to be here to serve you in the midst of this strange and important time. I said at the beginning, and I still think it's true, this may be the most important ministry any of us do in our lifetimes, is right now in this deep, deep, deep crisis. We need to be church together. That's what we're called to be. With all of the financial concerns and all of the discomfort with the weird technology we're being forced into, ultimately we are God's people. We are here to be faithful. We are here to be loving. We are here to bring a note of grace into a time of fear. And you are the leaders who are doing that. Thank you. Thank you for your ministry and your commitment and your courage, and for your willingness to learn all sorts of things that we've never done before. Andrea, I just finished my sermon and you didn't hear it. You get a chance to close us off by saying goodbye. Oh, you need to hang on. Can you not open your mic? Unmute. Yes,
There we
go for it.
Hello, I'm so sorry. We were talking before we started about how the internet was unstable in my worship building, and I'm now using my cell phone hotspot. So hello, everyone. I don't know where we left off. What would you like me to say? It's been so wonderful being here with all of you. My encouragement would be, please don't try to do it all, and take care of yourself. The boundaries don't exist when we are attached to our screens and doing everything on our screens. So we need to be really careful. And I'm praying for you all. And I think that you're all doing great. It takes a lot of courage to do what we're doing. And I see you all being very brave.
Indeed.
So you didn't hear my sermon, but you said the same thing. And that's, that's something that we're all feeling. So friends, thank you. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you for the ministry you're doing. We'll look forward to connecting with you in this space next Thursday. And we'll turn off our cameras now. If folks, if you want to stay online, I will put us into a breakout room to debrief, but let's turn our cameras off so we're at least giving the signal to people around that they're free to add their comments and leave. Thanks again. We'll see you again soon.